and also retail brands. And the retail cheese category continues to be very very competitive. And what continues to happen, and it's been a challenge for the branded food company or branded cheese companies, is that private label just continues to expand the share. So Saputo, they do win out on that a bit with their wholesale cheese business, but they lose out probably on their brands. And not surprisingly, they have a higher margin on the brands than they do on the retail than the wholesale stuff. So while maybe in a net of the volume they're okay, but they probably lose margin as they lose sales on the retail side and offset it with maybe some wholesale gains. But yeah, overall the categories is quite challenging for brands given the prevalence and growth in the private label.
And just to tie back to the Canadian market and their cheese processing, can I assume that the Canadian cheese processing is somewhat more profitable than the U.S. at this stage, but potentially changing? Or?
There's not a lot of volatility in it. We'll start there. Given that the government sets the milk prices and at a very high rate, a very high level, but I think they also have some costs built into their system that allow the manufacturers to make some money making cheese. However, it is a market. The cheese market in total in Canada is dominated by a couple of the big companies, Saputo, Agripure, and Parmalat.
Yeah.
And just parenthetically, just a couple days ago, Parmalat bought the Kraft natural cheese business in Canada. We can talk about that in a second if you'd like.
Yeah.
But those are the now it used to be four, now three really main players that really dominate the cheese space in Canada. But then you've got lots of little bitty niche or artisan type cheeses, the French cheeses and so forth. Those are very, very, very small relative to the overall market. So in terms of whether Saputo's making some money on their retail business, I would say probably the retail prices are very high relative to what we see here in the U.S. But like I said, they generate a significant amount of money in the Canadian market in general. So you could say that they're making good money across their operations in Canada, whether it's on the cheese side or the whey side or what have you. The system is a supply and managed system with very little trade, and it is basically a captive market for them.
I mean, one thing we've heard from others, I don't know if you agree with it, is that and Saputo's talked about it, is getting more competitive in the Canadian market, partly because changes at Parmalat, which is being more aggressive.
Yeah.
And then, the likes of Walmart and Costco sort of pushing harder, which in turn has pushed the Canadian, like Loblaws and Empire, to also.
Yeah.
So is that dynamic that you see as well?
Yeah, and that's as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the trend on private label is just going to continue to where more and more of the retailers and like you said, the mid-sized, smaller retailers are getting pushed in that direction because of what Walmart, Costco, and some of the mega retailers are doing in terms of their private label offerings. So the smaller, mid-sized ones have to match up to compete.
Yeah.
Okay. And I use Europe as a corollary here. If you look at if you ever go to Europe and go into the stores, particularly if you look at the retail food space in Europe, it's really dominated by private label. So Aldi is big there, but you start listing a lot of the large food retailers in Europe, and they have very big market shares in some of these categories in store brand private label products, and that's. I remember being over in Europe probably 15 years ago and visiting a number of stores and coming back and thinking, geez, at that time when I was working for Kraft, I was like, man, I don't really see a great future for branded food companies in a number of these categories, and that's really what's played out over the last 15 years, and I think it continues to be a trend moving forward.
Yeah. Your thoughts on the Kraft deal with Parmalat?
The Kraft natural cheese business in Canada sucked for a long time, so it was good they got some. That's. I think if it was up to some people, that would have been sold a long time ago. It's tough to grow it. It's been a bad business for a long time. So it's probably good, and particularly given Kraft's financial performance recently. I mean, they're going to start start to shuck off some of these ancillary businesses, and I think that's only going to continue. For Lactalis, they're buying stuff all over the place, and I think they only continue to grow. And I think you've seen now a more of a concerted effort to grow in that Canadian market than maybe what it has in the past.
Any impact on competitive dynamics?
Absolutely. So I think the in that natural cheese space, that Parmalat is going to be a stronger player. Kraft really since the 3G takeover in 2015, that have not probably really haven't put a whole lot of money in that business, particularly if they've been in the back of their mind they wanted to sell it. So there's probably hasn't been much, if any, investment in that. And now you've got a new owner with significant money behind them. So I think there's going to be, I would guess that Lactalis will be pouring money into that, and rightly so. They're trying to grow their new business. So I think that what that means then for Saputo and Agripure will be there's going to be more competition from Parmalat.
Yeah, and do they have different sort of margin? Because Saputo's always had pretty high margins. Just wondering if the likes of Parmalat are willing to grow at a lower margin to basically take share, if that's part of their strategy.
I would guess so. Yeah, I don't think they bought it just to have it. I know that business pretty well, and it's not been a great business for quite some time. So I don't think Parmalat or Lactalis bought it just to have it kind of being a kind of a crappy or moderate or modest business. I think they want to grow it, and they're going to put some investment in it.
Yeah.
And then maybe just in terms of sort of the efficiencies, I wonder if you have any thoughts in terms of, back to the point of Saputo's margins being higher. I mean, we understand they're good processors. In your experience, is there any secret sauce there, or is it just their plants are bigger, or any thoughts?
Combination of bigger bigger plants and economies of scale and operation to begin with. Secondly is equipment. Saputo has not been afraid to make investments in their plants to get new equipment in, more efficient equipment. Some of these plants that they own are older and probably, as far as from a depreciation standpoint, there's maybe not, don't have a lot of cost and from that standpoint, but they haven't been afraid to move stuff around, make investments, put new lines in that make them more efficient than some of the other cheese plants that, in a number of cases are pretty old and maybe are still running some pretty old equipment.
So from a Saputo standpoint, as far as if they're generating this cash flow, they're trying to grow, where should they grow? What's the outlook, or what's the prospect from your standpoint? It's sounding pretty tough wherever they go.
Yeah, cheese. I mean, the good news in terms of consumer demand is cheese demand continues to grow globally. The Asian market is growing, and that's from the U.S. standpoint. There's good growth there. Mexico is growing in terms of demand for cheese. So there is a good global growth story in terms of cheese demand. However, it's still largely a domestic-driven market. Of all the cheese that's produced in the U.S., close to 95% of it stays in the U.S. market. So exports are only talking 5, 6, 7% of total production. So it matters on the margin, but by and large, it's a domestic-driven business, and there continues to be growth in cheese consumption here in the U.S. So big picture, demand continues to grow. Versus if we're talking about bean foods and fluid milk, which is declining, long-term declines. Cheese has a good long-term growth outlook. It's not 5 or 10% growth, but it roughly grows with population, give or take a little, depending on the year. So that's positive. The protein side of it, I said, is good. I think a good long-term trend as well. Challenge there from the plant proteins. So yeah, I'd say most of their business, cheese and the whey, are in categories or in product lines that are growing. So that's positive. The smaller portion of their business, the I think what's their, cottage cheese and, that Morningstar business. I think that's like they've got